One of the ways to help improve communication with parents and understanding their perspective is knowing the stages of parent development. Most of this is pulled from Ellen Galinsky, who is an early childhood researcher and child development researcher. So, parents have images even before they welcome their first child of what they think the child will be like and how parenthood will go. Sometimes these images shift even before when the process of having a baby doesn't go as planned. So, that process can impact how a parent views their child and parenting. For example, if it took a long time for a couple to conceive a child, the parent might take longer to move through the stages and may appear more overprotective. We need to simply use this to help understand the parent, and in some case, it will give us some context to guide the parent to less protection. The next stage, stage 2, which is nurturing, is birth to approximately 18 months to 2 years old. Truly, when the child starts to say no, then we shift to another stage in parenting, and parents are starting to compare images to the actual experiences. So they had this image of the perfect baby, the baby that would sleep through the night, and now they're comparing it to having an 18-month-old that isn't sleeping through the night and is starting to tell the parent no, and how they make sense of that in their mind. Parent becomes attached to the child and usually doesn't see baby as the separate from themselves. This is a big piece to understand, that this stage can sometimes extend longer than 2 years. So it's very important, if you run into a family in those later years that you are finding that they have not separated themselves from the child, that they haven't really moved through these stages quite as they should. But for those of you that do ever work with parents with very young kids, to know that if you mention to a child a challenging behavior of a child in this age group, then the parent feels like you're saying that about themselves. And so, very important to keep that in mind about the language that we're using, and why parents might get very defensive or very hurt, and sometimes might be quick to tears, or some parents might respond very drastically and feel like they need to pull the child out of the program when that was not your intent at all. So, really thinking about how to carefully talk to parents about struggles you might be having with their child, especially when they're very young. Parent is faced with questions of priorities and adjusting to parenthood, fitting in parenting with other areas of life. For some parents, they might have taken off that first year or first 2 years and then trying to kind of reintegrate back into work more, or this might be when they're starting to think about having more children. And so just kind of, it's not all just about the baby as much anymore. The next stage is authority, and this is approximately ages 2 to 4 or 5 years old. And this is the stage where parents realize they need to start thinking about limits and boundaries. And there's often a struggle as parents are navigating that, thinking about the way they want to have authority, and then gaining the skills to do that. And so they might know that they don't want their child to say no back to them, but they may not yet know or realize how to do that. And that's where we can come in, if you work in early childhood, of how to work with parents to help them understand how they can do that, that you can have boundaries and limits and still have a very connected relationship. Parents beginning to understand that the child is really not an extension of them, and that's something that happens very gradually, but usually happens during the preschool years. And again, you might, if you work in elementary, you might still see where parents are actually still locked into that nurturing stage, that stage 2, where they have not separated themselves from the child. And usually we begin to see some negative impacts of that on the child, and we need to try to gain an understanding of why the parent might still be there, and not moving through the stages. So that example I gave during stage 1, if the parents tried a very long time to conceive a child, and it took years and years and years, that parent may really be holding on because they're so fearful of um, losing the child if they had experienced miscarriages, or in fact, if they had lost a child, they might be hanging on more and more and more, thinking that if they do that, they won't have to go through what they went through before, even though whatever that was not their fault. Um, and so again, we need to have an understanding of why someone might be in the place that they're at before we can help them move farther along. And again, that may not necessarily be your role as the child's teacher, but it's really helpful for you to understand that and then consider what might be some other resources to share with the parent. It isn't necessarily a mental illness if the parent is struggling to let go, but the parent might still benefit from some mental health counseling through that process, or meeting with a parent consultant or parent coach to really help them kind of understand that in themselves, and think about how they can move through that. Sometimes that's related to anxiety, sometimes it's even just related to what they might have experienced as children. So again, you don't necessarily have to dive into all of this as the child's teacher, but it's really helpful for you to have this understanding so you can be approaching parents with the lens of empathy uh, and authenticity. The fourth stage is the interpretive stage. This typically is the elementary school years, and this is where parent reviews the previous expectations and thinks, how realistic have I been? And also redefining the authority stage. So there might be parents that had in their mind behaviors that they knew they wouldn't be okay with when their child was kindergarten and older, and didn't quite realize that how they were parenting the child prior to that was actually impacting how the child would behave in these elementary years. And so for some parents, they're now kind of stepping back and realizing, wow, we really need to start kind of dealing with some of these things that we hadn't dealt with, that we felt like we had to under control more because the child was smaller, they still seemed little, and now that they're more in school, we're seeing maybe we need to be doing a little bit more here. There's also increased separateness, but still remaining connected, and obviously that separateness naturally happens if they're heading off to school away from the parent. But if they're homeschooling the child, which again you wouldn't be having those interactions with the child because they wouldn't be in your class, but that separateness they can still be working towards that. It's just not as natural. And then this is also where the parent is realizing my child is not me, and that is a really important realization to come to, because we have to be able to, as parents, accept our child for who they are. And I'm sure you have all experienced at times when a parent isn't accepting their child for who they are, and that is something that we can really help a parent with as the child's teacher by pointing out the fabulous characteristics that you do see, even if the child challenges you. All children have fabulous characteristics. Even if they have challenging characteristics, they all have some fabulous ones. And to be able to point those out to the parent, and so the parent can see that, okay, they're not me, but hey, they're pretty great. Um, let's see. The other thing is, since a child is growing in his ability to have more independence, the parent may appreciate guidance on how to offer this appropriately. And so that could be another piece where you're sharing some of the things that you are allowing your students to have independence in the classroom, and then you could share, oh, think about how that might look at in your home. If you're wanting your child to have more independence at home, here are some ideas, or even just think about what those might be. The next stage is the last stage, I should say, that we're going to go through is the interdependent stage, which is the teen years. I know some of you are middle school and high school teachers, and this is important for parents to know themselves, their standards and the boundaries, and their teenager. And they're really stepping back and re-examining previous views the parent had of the child, and This is really the stage where the child really needs to form their own identity, and parents often benefit from support during this stage. Sharing with parents what's typical adolescent behavior acts as a guide for parents as they navigate this challenging stage of parenting. Although I have worked with children and with parents for many, many years, as my children have been going through the teen years, this, even to me, feels like a very unnatural time for me to be parenting. It doesn't, out of all of the stages of parenting, this stage in particular does not come natural to me. I'm thinking with Gloria, this stage might come more naturally to her than it does to me because she has worked with teenagers for so long. And that is another piece that I've really noticed as I've gone through kind of my own parenting journey with friends and such, and with parents that I've worked with, is parents have their different stages that they thrive in. And for me, this is not the stage I'm thriving in, but I can tell you I have so appreciated um, the the information that their teachers in middle school and high school would share when they would talk about, so it's beneficial if your child is starting to take the lead on their homework, or these are some prompting questions about their day. And I was doing some of those things, but it was still really useful to hear, okay, I am on the right track. And so just to keep that in mind, even when someone seems like a fairly confident parent, they can still benefit from some feedback and some kind of, okay, I'm on the right track. We all have some insecurities when it comes to our kids, and that can be easy to not notice or not think is possible when you're working with parents. This could be also a nice time where you're sharing information about what you have learned or are learning about teenagers and social media. And even when the class that I'm getting communication from the parent isn't related to social media, when they're sharing things like that, I have found it to be very useful. And I often take those nuggets of information into kind of parenting decisions that we make. And so just keep in mind, you still, even though you may never actually face to face meet the parents of your middle school and high school students, by sharing some things more about, like, I wouldn't suggest saying don't allow them on social media, but hey, I know so many kids are interacting on social media. Here are some things that we are talking about in class about social media, or here are just some observations I've made about the impacts of social media. If you ever have concerns about this with your child, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. So I'm just thinking of different ways that you could kind of incorporate that into memos and such that you might share with parents. Overall, though, the stages are just super useful to keep in mind with parents are at. So we know child development, we know the different stages that kids go through, and if this is new information to you, now you have a sense that that happens with parents too. If any of you are parents, you know, you can probably kind of pick out where you've been in the different areas, and reasons for maybe why you maybe didn't move through a stage as quickly as you would have